German planners believed the next Allied landing in the Mediterranean would be read from hard evidence. They were wrong. In April 1943, British Naval Intelligence decided the most convincing evidence would be carried by a dead man. The deception used one body, one briefcase, and one identity: Major William Martin. The corpse was dressed in Royal Marines-style service dress, fitted with identity cards, tickets, receipts, and private letters, then issued forged operational papers describing an Allied attack aimed at Greece. The unexpected factor was bureaucratic detail, not explosives. Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague, Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, and Squadron Leader Charles Chumley, Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve, built a paper trail designed to survive Spanish police scrutiny and reach German intelligence. On the 4th of June 1943, The Times printed an obituary notice for Acting Major William Martin, reinforcing the cover. Captured German records later showed the documents were accepted as genuine. That acceptance influenced Axis deployments weeks before Operation Husky put assault troops ashore in Sicily. The 19th of April 1943, 0400 hours. Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague, Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, supervised final preparations in London, at the Admiralty near Whitehall, 1.0 mile from the Thames. Montague had ordered a complete false person file for Major William Martin, including photographs, pay book entries, and a letter chain linking senior staffs. His team, working through British Naval Intelligence Division and the XX Committee, planned for the body to reach Spain by sea so local officials would process it as a crash victim. On the opposing side, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of the WWII, and his representatives in Spain relied on diplomatic access and copied documents. Axis planners already expected a post-North Africa assault toward Sicily because it was about 90 miles from Tunisia to the island's southwest coast, within range of medium bombers. The Allies expected the Germans to judge operational papers by internal formatting, signatures, and routing. The cover story used small, checkable items. A receipt dated the 14th of April 1943, a letter mentioning leave, and a chain of envelopes with matching postmarks. But one factor created different conditions. Spanish neutrality gave German agents time for careful photography rather than hurried theft. This meant the papers could be duplicated and forwarded without obvious damage. Intelligence gathered from intercepted traffic and double-cross reports in early April 1943 indicated German analysts weighed documentary finds heavily, especially when they included unit references and landing dates. However, this did not account for how fast Berlin could react if Greece appeared threatened. The geography mattered. Huelva sits on Spain's Atlantic coast, roughly 10 miles from the Portuguese border, with currents that could carry a drifting body to accessible beaches. Sea conditions and recovery procedures would determine whether the briefcase remained attached long enough to be found. What happened in the next 72 hours would determine how Axis reserves were allocated across the Mediterranean. At 0430 hours on the 19th of April 1943, the briefcase was secured to the corpse by a chain, and seals were checked to show no forced opening. At 0600 hours, a submarine transport plan was confirmed to deliver the body to waters off Huelva. At 2300 hours, the release point was selected to match local currents and a realistic drift time. The body carried letters, a wallet, keys, and identification consistent with a staff officer. The documents specified an invasion concept emphasizing Greece and Sardinia, reducing the apparent probability of a Sicily landing. At 0815 hours on the 20th of April 1943, Spanish officials recovered the body and logged the case as personal effects. By 1100 hours, British diplomatic staff requested return of the briefcase intact, creating pressure to avoid visible tampering. Meanwhile, German contacts sought access for photography rather than removal. At 1700 hours, WWII channels in Spain forwarded reports to Berlin describing British operational papers found with a major. At 2200 hours, analysts compared signatures and staff titles against known British orders of battle. German staff officers treated the material as authentic because the supporting clutter matched dates and routine transactions. At the 4th of June 1943, the obituary notice for Acting Major William Martin appeared in the Times, providing a public confirmation line that German readers could verify without a spy network. By mid-June, German planners reinforced Greece and the Aegean while Sicily's garrison remained the likely target but not the priority. But at the 9th of July 1943, 2,200 hours, invasion convoys closed on Sicily, and the earlier paper decision met the real landing timetable. At 0015 hours on the 10th of July 1943, Allied ultra-intercepts at Bletchley Park logged Luftwaffe Enigma traffic from Fliegerkorps II listing 2 Gruppen of Ju-88s retasked to the Aegean, not Sicily. Squadron leader F.W. Winterbotham, RAF, noted the message's grid references and the absence of any codeword for Palermo. By 0210 hours, the pattern matched earlier Abwehr assessments from Huelva. German planners were counting Greece as the main objective. The Allies had expected at least 6 Gruppen held for Sicilian anti-shipping strikes. Winterbotham briefed Commander Edward Travis, RN, who passed the summary to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham. By 0500 hours, Cunningham ordered Force H to maintain radio silence and keep carriers beyond 120 miles of expected Luftwaffe search arcs. Vice Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay's staff adjusted convoy spacing from 5 to 8 miles. The immediate effect was 0 air attacks before first light. The key technical cause was German dependence on document-driven assessment validated by signals coverage gaps. Abwehr photographic copies from Huelva preserved the forged signatures and routing marks, including British, most secret, handling lines, without creases. The deception's design exploited Spanish access and avoided the abrasion that usually exposed ink layering. Strategically, it mattered because Luftwaffe and Army reserves were finite. In July 1943, Kesselring could shift only about 2 divisions by rail each week across Italy. German planners expected Sicily, as in Tunisia, where 1,300 sorties in April attacked Allied shipping. The reality was fewer aircraft positioned for Sicily's opening nights. Evidence appears in the post-war OKW study, Der Krieg im Mittelmeerraum 1940–1944, which notes that Greece was treated as Schwerpunkt into early July. A captured Abwehr summary dated the 30th of June stated the British main landing would be in the Balkans. Those texts confirmed the misallocation. At 0230 hours on the 10th of July 1943, U.S. 7th Army Staff under Lieutenant General George S. Patton activated beachhead air warning nets assuming limited enemy reconnaissance. At Gela, the 1st Infantry Division reported only 3 daylight overflights before noon, versus 17 recorded during rehearsals off North Africa. That reduction helped land 162 LST and LCI craft on schedule. At 0830 hours, General Sir Harold Alexander ordered 13th Corps to press inland to Highway 124 rather than pause for consolidation, revising the original D-Day line by 4 miles. Admiral Cunningham reallocated 12 destroyers from anti-E-boat patrol to close gunfire support, requiring a 600-ton resupply of 4.7-inch and 5-inch ammunition from Malta. By 2,400 hours on the 10th of July, Allied logs counted 18 Luftwaffe sorties over the main landing areas, compared to 90 projected by Mediterranean Air Command planners. Naval casualties were 1 destroyer damaged and 2 landing craft sunk, not the 10 craft anticipated. Post-war staff college calculations credited reduced air pressure with saving 300 to 500 men in the first 24 hours. The full implications would only be understood when classified files were opened decades later. Documents recovered in 1997 revealed how fragile the deception's logistics actually were. In Admiralty File ADM 127107, a sea state estimate sent to HMS Seraph warned that spring tides off Huelva could shear any improvised tether. Montague's memo required the briefcase chain to be looped through the coat, not the wrist, to prevent a swelling corpse from slipping the cuff. This contradicts the simplified retelling that success depended mainly on forged letters. Without predictable drift and intact attachment, Spanish officials would have logged papers missing, breaking the entire evidentiary premise. Medical logs in 1943 showed Major Martin reached Spain in worse condition than the official narrative implies. The Huelva post-mortem, preserved in the National Archives, FO 371 34537, recorded early decomposition consistent with days in seawater, not hours. British planning assumed a 12 to 18-hour drift. Local tide tables indicate nearer 36. That is a 100% increase in exposure time, narrowing the margin for document survival. Spanish police inventories listed water intrusion on the outer envelope, forcing German agents to photograph damp pages rather than handle originals, limiting annotation and slowing Berlin's evaluation cycle by roughly 24 hours. For decades, it was believed mincemeat's decisive effect was simply Greece over Sicily. However, declassified British signals summaries in 1972, and Ben McIntyre's 2010 synthesis, shifted emphasis toward timing. The deception mattered because it delayed concentration of air and mobile reserves during the first 72 hours of Husky. Earlier official histories leaned on German gullibility. Newer readings stress bureaucratic confirmation loops inside OKW and the Abwehr. Evidence and debate now pivot on proportional impact, as Fortitude drew roughly 20 to 25 German divisions toward Pas-de-Calais. Mincemeat influenced fewer formations, yet it targeted a narrower window. Scholars compare it to Operation Bertram at El Alamein, where dummy tanks misled in the final week and helped achieve surprise across a 40-mile front. The consensus, drawing on Freiburg's Bundesarchiv Militararchiv and captured OKW diaries, is that mincemeat reinforced an existing Balkan fear rather than creating it outright. Flight Lieutenant David Ainsworth, RAF, No. 30 Squadron, age 24, met the consequences of that misallocation on 10 July 1943, flying a Maryland photo sortie off Sicily. In his letter dated 12 July, held at the Imperial War Museum, he wrote, "The sky was oddly empty, and then suddenly full," describing scattered, late-arriving fighters rather than a coordinated screen. When flak hit his port engine near Gela, he chose to keep his camera run steady, finishing 12 frames that mapped fresh gun pits behind the beaches. Those photographs guided a naval bombardment that neutralized 3 positions within an hour. Ainsworth survived a ditching, was picked up by an LCI crew, and returned to operations in August. His experience was typical of the 160,000 men who faced this dilemma, influencing later doctrine. On Sicily's opening night, the deception compressed German reaction time and thinned the air threat. Ultra showed 2 Ju-88 Gruppen held in the Aegean. Mediterranean Air Command had projected 6 over the beaches. Cunningham shifted 12 destroyers into close support and accepted a 600-ton ammunition draw from Malta. Staff College models expected 10 landing craft lost in 24 hours. The actual count was 2 sunk and 1 destroyer damaged. With 300 to 500 casualties avoided, that is roughly a 35 to 55% reduction against the forecast band. Over the next month, that margin translated into tempo. Alexander's 13th Corps advanced the D-Day line by 4 miles and sustained pressure that forced Kesselring to feed piecemeal units into Sicily rather than mass them. By the 20th of August 1943, OKW issued new guidance tightening document security and courier control after the Spanish episode. Operations planned for a mid-July Luftwaffe concentration over Sicily occurred on the 13th of July, a difference of about 72 hours. Historian John Latimer calculates that if the Huelva papers had been dismissed as a plant, Kesselring would have kept at least 1 additional mobile division and 3 to 4 air groups oriented on Sicily, and that concentration would have delayed the Gela-Catania advance by 10 to 14 days. Most current scholarship agrees the deception did not create the Balkan hypothesis, but it hardened it inside OKW long enough to blunt the first 72 hours of Husky. Compared with Operation Bertram at El Alamein, which masked an assault across roughly 40 miles. Mincemeat bought less frontage but more time-critical advantage. Ewan Montague returned to London in 1945 and resumed legal work, later serving as a county court judge. In a 1977 interview, he reflected, "It was the small, verifiable rubbish that made the story live." He died in London on the 19th of July 1985. Charles Chumley left wartime staff work behind, joined the diplomatic service, and died on the 30th of April 1982. His family kept his role quiet for decades. The man used as William Martin, Glendower Michael, was reburied at Huelva and identified publicly in 1998. A memorial plaque at the cemetery of Nuestra Señora de la Soledad, Huelva, was dedicated on the 11th of May 2004, marking the case's documented end. In 2006, NATO Deception Doctrine, AJP 3.10, formalized administrative detail realism as a planning requirement, echoing Mincemeat's method. On the 10th of July 1943, 160,000 men achieved a viable Sicilian lodgment, shifting the Husky opening phase casualty rate by roughly 300 to 500 men in 24 hours.